Welcome. I'm Dave Christie with the LaRouche organization, and today I am joined by the Schiller Institute's representative to the United Nations, Richard Black. Richard will be presenting aspects of his paper for the Great Reset white paper that is being produced by Executive Intelligence Review. Richard's article is entitled A Green Way of Development with Chinese Characteristics, which, for those of you that have a sense of that, China's sense of green is far different than the British monarchy's sense of green. So perhaps that'd be a good place to start, Richard. What's the difference?
Well, let's look at what China is doing now. They currently have 49 nuclear fission plants. They're currently constructing another 16, which would put them significantly ahead of the U.S. In nuclear power generation when those 16 are completed. They're also building 11 new nuclear power plants, mostly in Eastern Europe, South America, and Africa, the poor sector, the former colonial sector, which will allow these nations to have modern levels of electricity use once these programs are implemented. At the same time, they have the most advanced thermonuclear fusion program in the world. Their chief plasma scientists are saying they expect to be producing electricity from thermonuclear fusion by 2040, and they have the only experimental thorium fission reactors in the world. This is a very advanced design, excellent because it's ultra safe, much easier to produce, and uses thorium, which is far more abundant than uranium. So that's the Chinese approach to energy. They're going to produce more of it. They're moved towards the splitting of the nucleus rather than the chemical bonds of fossil fuel, and they're going for energy intense methods of energy production. That's the rational way. That's the way Americans used to think. Uh, what was presented at Davos in opposition to what China is doing are ancient 18th century methods. Thomas Malthus, Winston Churchill, Henry Kissinger. Zero growth, energy resource restriction, austerity, depopulation. That is the difference.
Well, and certainly I know that Xi Jinping made a reference that this kind of development was going to be done without austerity, and I think we already are seeing the effect of the austerity policy run by the Green Agenda in terms of really what is a depopulation agenda, and certainly that leads to geopolitical tensions where nations of the West are in a collapse mode by turning their back on these productive capabilities, these high energy capabilities, whereas China and also the nations they're lending to and working with are moving in a different direction. What do you see the geopolitical implications of those two opposing views?
World War III. That's where this leads. If the current insanity in the leaderships in Europe, North America, continue, which is that since the former colonial sector, aided by Russia and China, is now in a mode of modernization, modern development, modern energy use, and modern level of advanced education for the young across the globe, uh, to the extent that the elites in the West see this as a threat around their theory, no one can equal us or compete with us. You see the baseless and wild anti Russia, anti China campaigns in the United States, for instance, from both political parties. And as the head of the Strategic Air Command, Admiral Charles Richards, said this week, yes, nuclear war is quite doable. We have to prepare to fight nuclear war. Who are the targets? China and Russia. And the propaganda that most of us see in the media and from the political elites is to prepare for war, creating a false but uh, uh, devastating enemy image out of the Russian people, out of the Chinese people. Quite
Yeah,
mad.
Yeah, there was also this longer Telegram article published, or a study published by the Atlantic Council, which just called for the direct overthrow of Xi Jinping. And I think that certainly gets to the point that if China was going along with the globalists, as a lot of people just baselessly assert, obviously we know there's fights in all nations around these matters, but if Xi Jinping and China were going along with it, there'd be no reason for this type of dramatic call for regime change. But I thought it notable because, of course, Xi Jinping did speak at Davos, as did Vladimir Putin. But I know in discussions with you on what the content of what they said was different than what Klaus Schwab and the others. Maybe you could give people a sense of that.
Well, it's quite funny because it's all out in the open. Nothing is hidden. It's quite plain. When the president of China, Xi Jinping, spoke at the UN, this was at the General Assembly a few months ago, he said, "Look, the COVID-19 reminds all of humanity that what we need to do is launch a green revolution. We have to move much faster for what he called a green way of development and life." A green way of development life. He said we have to protect the environment. He said, and this is my favorite part, he said, we must make Mother Nature a better place for us all. So the Chinese are simply saying we have to improve nature. We have to tame the land. We have to produce the energy and the soft infrastructure, the education, etc., for a growing world population. Improve Mother Nature. This Davos crowd, dating back hundreds of years to the imperial mindset of the British East India Company, says no, we will never allow the lower classes to develop. China is saying the opposite, so therefore they're a target of war.
Yeah, I thought the other thing that jumped out of your article, and you did another presentation on this, was the idea of how they're actually determining economic value and coming up with different metrics for this. And in particular, the emphasis that they had that it would be quality over quantity. And in other words, simple measures of GDP don't quite get at the kind of development that they intend. And I know you discussed in some detail the concept that they're going to be dedicating 10% of their budget towards cultural activities. But maybe you could give a sense of more broadly, what do they mean by this quality versus quantity? What is their sense of economic metrics?
Yeah, in a sense, again, it's very direct. Anybody that bothers themselves to read what the Chinese are saying internally in China, what they put out as their public policy, it's very, very clear. The Chinese are saying, in, for instance, their recent 5-year plan outline, that there are three things that create value in an economy. Just three: advances in science, rates of innovation, and advances in the fine arts, creating masterpieces of art. If you pursue science, technological innovation, and great art in the population, the labor force will become more productive, and then that becomes monetized and circulated as an upshift in the economy as a whole. That's the big so called communist secret. But of course, there's nothing communist about that. In fact, when the best government economists in China are asked, well, who are your guides in terms of this economic policy, in terms of the relationship between the government role, private enterprise, they cite the German American economist Friedrich List, the most famous Western economist in China.
Hmm. Well, I think it's clear we have a massive brawl internationally around which of those systems will prevail, the American system or this the policies of the British East India Company. And I think as you said it clearly, the geopolitical implications of that are World War III. So perhaps to end, what would be your message to the audience that you talk to with it, whether it be institutions, people within the United Nations, government circles, or the populations in general, what would be your message to them?
Well, my message would be number one, read this book by Lyndon LaRouche, Earth's Next 50 Years. It outlines the American system method of economics, the kind of thing that is being employed by China now. I mean, what's happening this week? United Arab Emirates, uh, China, the US are all moving into Mars orbit. So what we need internationally is a chorus of voices from the poor nations, from the superpowers, saying that it's time for superpower collaboration to deal with the hideous pandemic, to deal with the frontiers of science, to expand man's vision. So on in this month of Mars, now would be the time to change course in the West and join our very historic allies, Russia and China, who for decades and decades and decades were always the greatest of friends of the young and middle aged United States.
Well, that certainly is the message of the Earth's next 50 years. I think, Richard, your challenge for everybody to read that. Although I would say make sure you get a quick read in of the Great Reset pamphlet that will be circulating and get that out to far and wide through your networks, and then jump right back to that book, The Earth's Next 50 Years by Mr. LaRouche. So, Richard, thanks for being on today, and thank you all for listening.
Great to see you.